Hello everybody. I'm still experiencing some microphone problems. I am hoping that I can just remember to keep my head facing toward the camera, the one built into my laptop, because that will hopefully take care of the issue. I've got 4 different microphones. Well, really 5, 6. I've got 6 different microphones, and I've been playing and playing. I had the one working once. I can't get it to connect anymore. So I don't know what I'm going to do. Just keep trying and listen to my dog. I'm Joy from Shout for Joy Quilter, and here is week 1, clue 1 for walking into fall mystery quilt. This week we are going to need 3.5-inch squares. If you are doing scrappy, which is how I'm doing it, you will need 72 colored feature. I'm going to probably call them feature more than color background squares, and you will need 72 you need 72 feature fabric and 72 background fabric squares. These will be 3.5 inches. Easy peasy. First, I'm going to talk about making our units with these pieces. I'll cut a couple 3.5-inch squares, talking about what to look for on your ruler, and then I'm going to show how to make our unit with strips after that. We'll be making 4 patches with 3.5-inch squares, so our 4 patches will end up 6.5 inches unfinished. That means once they're sewn into the quilt, they will equal 6 inches. So, without further ado, let's go to the cutting. Okay, looks like a couple of you are here. Again, I apologize if the sound goes a little wonky. I can't do much about that. So, I already have some cut, as you can see, and I'm going to just cut a couple more fabrics. Here's a scrap from my scrap bin. That should be good. I've taken my square ruler. This one's a 6.5-inch ruler. I usually use Creative Grids. Those are both packed away at the moment. Well, I have 3. But they're all packed away at the moment for other things. So I've taken my handy dandy ruler stickers and I've put them at 3.5 and at 3.5, and I'm going to take, if I can get it off there, the broken off piece from this guy, and I'm going to find my 3.5-inch mark out here so that I can easily find the corner that I'm going to be lining up. I know, blue stickers, I'm using blue fabric. Probably not the smartest thing to do. So I'm going to lay this down on my fabric, my scrap fabric here. And I must not have been the greatest cutter the last time. So I am going to overshoot my line. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to switch out to another fabric so you can see. Those blue on blue is bad policy here. Let's go with a gold fabric. As you can see, it's definitely a scrap. I've cut chunks out of it willy-nilly. I don't even have a straight edge down here, but now you can see my blue stickers, which is the part that we need to see. So I'm going to leave a little bit of fabric past my 3.5-inch line so that I can make sure that I cut this square. So I've got fabric beyond the 3.5 inch line on all sides here. And I'm going to cut up. I'm going to cut just to the edge of my square, and now I'm going to fold my fabric up, and I'm going to cut across the other direction. There we go. This way I don't have a cut going into this part of the fabric. It only went on one side. That means that I can cut right up to this edge later on. Okay, so now I'm going to turn my piece. I like having a spinny mat. Another option is to have a small cutting mat on top of a big one and just turn it around. This time I know that this is a 90-degree angle. I just cut those, they're fresh cut. Now I'm going to lay my ruler down, and I am going to put my ruler lines directly on top of my cut line. What I want is I want to be able to have that extra. Students frequently ask me, do I want to bump it up against the line? Do I want to try to split the difference, or do I totally cover the fabric with the line? Cover the fabric with your line. Remember that scant inch or scant quarter inch that we're always talking about? This will help you with your scant quarter inch by giving you 2 more threads worth of fabric. So now I'm going to cut the other 2 sides, which will make my square a nice 3.5 inch square. And I'm just going to do that with all kinds of my fabrics. And I am going to be making a 4-patch out of these fabrics. So there we go. Got 4 fabrics all chosen. And what I'm going to do is I will sew these 2 together first. I'm going to chain. I'm going to leave them together. I'm not going to cut my thread in between. And then I will sew these 2. So I will just put this on top of that, lining it up. I'm not going to pin, but if you need to pin, go ahead and pin. Something this short, I usually don't pin. There's no seams in there. So I will sew right down here, and I will directly sew right down here. So let's move to the sewing machine. And I'm going to sew my 1/4 inch. I've tested, I know where my 1/4 inch is, tested it. So I'm confident that I can sew there. Now I'm just going to lay that next one in. Now you notice I have my feature fabric on top of my background here, right sides together. Here I have my feature fabric underneath and my background fabric on top, again right sides together, because I don't want to have a date with Jack today. Got enough going on in my life that I don't need to spend time with Jack. Okay, so those 2 are sewn, and we will go back to our workstation here. I'll move my cutting mat out of the way, and I have my 2 squares sewn together. Let's see, move this a little bit. Again, let me know if it's terrible sound. I'm going to keep trying different things every week, but we're still going on. Okay, so here I have my feature fabric on top. Here I have my background fabric on top. I am going to flip this over. And this is what I do every time I make 4 patches. So I have flipped them over. I've got my seam here, and they're stuck together. And I am going to press like I sewed it, That does two things. It pushes my stitches into my fabric, but it also softens my fabric as long as the fabric is warm. I'm going to gently open that up, and I'm going to press. I'm not ironing, I'm not pushing back and forth, I'm going up and down. Anytime I make a side-to-side movement, I pick my iron up like a hovercraft, so it just goes slightly over top. Okay, and come across on this one and press. So now my seams are going, I've got a seam behind here and a seam behind here. I'm going to lay my fabrics one on top of the other. I'm going to get rid of this extra. And I am going to now cut in between, because I don't need them together at this point. I'm going to be sewing them together, so I don't need that link. What I am going to do, and I'm going to do this with every single one of my 4 patches, I am going to put it so under the machine so that I sew from the feature fabric to the background fabric, and I have that seam allowance pointing toward my feature fabric. It's going to be pointing toward my presser foot as I go through. Now, what's going to happen is my presser foot is going to help nest these 2 seams that I have here, which is a bonus for me. Sometimes I'll also pin, and again, I like these fork pins. You can use these fork pins, or you can put a pin in on either side. All of the above work well. I'm going to move back to my machine. There we go. And again, I'm going to sew my 1/4 inch. Now, because I have a fork pin in here, I'm going to let that go up. I am going to sew super slow until I hit my seam. Man, you're not, that's super bright. Let's see if I can darken that. Is that a little better? I can maybe even bring it in a little closer. I didn't realize how bright that was. I tested all these other things and didn't test that one. Okay, you still not sure if you can see it, but I have my seam, and I'm going to run over the far side of my pin first, and I'm going to go super slow so that the needle can kind of deflect around the pin if it hits it, which it did not. And then once I hit my seam line, then I'm going to pull my pin out, because it's not going to do me any more good at that point, and stitch the rest of my seam. There we go. I will be doing a lot of these all at once, so I would have my next one ready to go, and I would just sew along. But I'm sewing one for right now. So we'll go back to the workstation. And there is my 4 patch. And I'm going to press that and go on. I'm going to press it as I showed it, or I sewed it. And yes, I understand it's pausing with the weather. I think that my internet connection is not as great, because we had some really awful stuff happening, and they're still working on restoring power and internet to local areas. I'm recording this 2 ways. I will upload it again in a bit. So hopefully we can get this all resolved. And I will show how to cut when using controlled fabrics in a few moments. So, going back to, I've pressed it as I sewed it. Now I'm going to pick it up. Well, first I'm going to look. Here's my seam allowance on this side, so it's going to be on this side on the back. I'm going to pick it up. I'm going to grab my seam allowance away from the crossed seam allowance, and I'm going to pull forward on this side, and I'm going to push away on that side, like that. And it pops my stitches in that in-between seam allowance there. Sometimes it pops it better than others, and today I have to encourage it to pop a little more. Sometimes those seams just hold, and then I'm going to finger press that little spot right there. And see, I have this tiny little 4-patch on the back. It makes me happy to have that little 4-patch. That's one of those joyful moments in sewing and quilting. I look for that. It's the magic little 4-patch. Now I'm going to check on the front because I pressed from the back first. I don't want to have any folds, any tucks here, because that will change the size and shape of my 4-patch. So I'm just going to make sure that I have no tucks. Some people call those duck lips. And there's my 4-patch. I need 36 4-patches for this quilt. So that'll be the sewing part of your assignment for next month. And the other assignment will be to cut 36 3.5-inch squares of background fabric. So you'll need more background fabric, and I've got to start, of course. So you'll need 36, and then you'll label a bag clue 5, and you'll put those in clue 5. Okay, now let's see if I can get this to work. Talking about doing this with get me back on here. We're going to talk about doing it with controlled fabrics. If you have one fabric A, one fabric B, etc. So let's see if this works. Get rid of that and get rid of that. There we go. I did this earlier hoping it would work. Hopefully it doesn't have the sound on it. We'll see. So please play. Nope, that was not right. There we go. So here I have some yardage of fabric, and I am going to match up my seam allowance. I'm not going to worry about the cut edges on the outside. I'm matching up, not the seam allowance, I'm matching up the selvage edge. And I want it to be flat all the way out to the fold, and that's what I'm fussing with right there. And then I'm folding it in half, matching the selvage edge to the fold. If those two are parallel, then when I cut my strips, then I will not have a V or a W in my cut. If you notice out on the outside, that cut edge isn't straight on the top of itself, that's okay. I'm more concerned with the fold and the selvage edges. I use the Stripology ruler. This is the Stripology Extra Large. I've got it marked with my 3.5-inch strips. You will need 5 3.5-inch strips from each of those feature fabrics that I have mentioned in the clue, which will be uploaded a little later. So I've cut off my selvage, or the wonky edge. Now I'm cutting in every slot, the 3.5, the 7, 10.5, 14, and 17 and a half, I think are the slots that I've got marked there. And I've got them cut, and you'll see they're all cut right there. Isn't that great? They're cut all at once. I love that. And then what I do, let's go back to the machine here, and I will take you'll need 5 strips of each of your feature fabrics. You'll need 10 strips of background fabric. And all I do, I take those strips and I line them up, and I assembly line sew. I'm going to sew this whole strip together. It doesn't matter which side is up. I'm just gonna, oops, wrong machine. Okay, I'm just gonna sew down my 1/4 inch. You can do this as fast as you are comfortable sewing. And you just do the whole thing. I'm not going to do the whole thing. I think you understand. I do that for all 10 strips, so 5 of each color with the background. And then, let's go back over here. What I will do is I will take that strip and I'm going to press it as I sewed it. I'm keeping the feature fabric up, and then I'm going to open it, and I'm going to press the seam toward the feature fabric. If I were doing this with a dark background, maybe I'd do it the opposite, but the way we do these 4 patches, it really doesn't matter. Just be consistent. Okay, so I would do that with all of my strips, like that. Okay, and now let's see. I would have 5 of one strip pair and 5 of the other strip pair. And now let's see if my other video works. Okay, so here I have them all laid out, or rather, I dropped them on there. And if you'll notice, what I'm going to do is I'm going to layer them one on top of the other. So I've got one facing right side up, and the other one I will be flipping over. And I will match feature fabric to, yep, right there, I'm showing feature fabric to the background fabric. And I'm going to butt that seam, I'm going to nest the seam, and you can see that right there. Makes it really easy. I'll show you why in just a minute here. Yeah, I probably shouldn't have had the ruler underneath. All these things you learn about. So I put that whole thing, nesting those seams up against one another. This will save time when I bring it to my sewing machine. Always a good thing. Not that I always want to do fast, but when I'm assembly line, when I'm doing a lot of the same thing, I like that to go fast. And then I can move on and I can take time with the next step. So again, here I'm making sure that they're nested one on top of the other. And I'm going to take my ruler, which again, I still have those marks, and I can move, I'm moving one of the stickers all the way to the outside, because if you have the extra large, from 17 and a half to the outside edge of that ruler, maybe I should be using this hand, is another 3.5 inch. So I can get one more strip out of that. I can get one more cut out of that. And so I can get 6 pairs cut all at once without having to move my ruler or fabric, which is fantastic. What I am doing is I'm lining up the strips so they're straight across, and then I will take the line on the ruler and I have that right on top of my seam line. And I'm going to cut the selvage off first, and then 3.5, 7, etc. And those pairs are stacked just right. Okay, it still is kind of wonky, isn't it? Yep. So I now move it down and just do the same thing. So I get 12 cuts out of that. So I told you to cut 5. I got 12 out of each one, so I really only needed 4 of each color. But some fabrics are narrower, so try 4 and only cut the extra if you need it. So I will put that in the notes at the end. So there you go, 3.5, 7, 10.5, etc. And there you go, all the way out to the edge. And those are all done. And I leave my pieces. Yeah, that's how much is left. Not much. But if you have a narrower fabric, you might need a full 5 to get 36 pairs out of that. And guess what? I have to trim. Okay, I'm going to turn that guy off and go back over here to my machine, and let's go to the workstation because I think I have a couple of those right here. And see, they're already stacked the way they need to be. I've got the dark or the feature fabric on top of the background fabric, and I'm just going to take them to the machine. They're already ready to sew. And if I leave them in the stack, they will just be one after the other. So back to the machine, and I will sew. This time, you notice I did not put my pin in there. I finger pin it. I make sure I hold it with my finger. I can feel that they're right where they need to be. And it'll work. It'll all work out. Okay, so there we go. There we go. And I would just keep going and keep going, and then cut all of them apart at the end. Go back to the workstation, and I can press, and again I'm going to pull toward the side that has the extra seam allowance and push away the other side. And these seem to be behaving better than the first ones that I did. So here we go. Press, press, press. And you can do this, leave one on top of another. I just try not to have all of my seam allowances one on top of the other. You see how everything is offset. So those are done. And again, if you are working with fabrics that are controlled instead of scrappy, you'll have 36 of these finished, and you will cut 36 background squares and put them in a bag labeled Clue 5. And that will be what you need for Clue 1. Again, I will upload the instruction sheet in a few minutes. I've got it written out. I just haven't saved it as a PDF, and that's how I want to put it up there, so it doesn't go wonky on you when you go to download it and print it. So there you go, Clue 1, Falling into Mystery with Shout for Joy Quilter. Thanks for joining me.